Well, everyone, it's time for us to go and take a look at the iPad Air 2 and see how this particular iPad holds up in 2024. Now, I will definitely tell you, I don't really think any single person should be buying the iPad Air 2 anymore, but I do feel a lot more different about this particular iPad than the iPad Air 1, mostly due to a couple of different things. But I will definitely tell you, you're much better off purchasing devices that are still supported with software that are still relevant. This one isn't really any of those things, and that's why I kind of would look at this particular device as not being the first one I'd recommend the vast majority of people to buy. So from that particular perspective, that kind of covers it up there. But if you want to buy some particular devices and iPads that I would recommend buying, links will be down in the description. You can get them from there and you can help support the channel at the same time. Now, starting off with the outside of this particular iPad, you can basically see that on the front side of this thing, it looks still like a very, very good, decent iPad. Like, it doesn't really look that ugly or that even outdated compared to like an iPad 8 or maybe even an iPad 9. You were getting that 9.7-inch IPS LCD panel on this thing. And funny enough, this iPad is actually turning 10 years old now. So this display, the bezel, everything that you're seeing is on a 10-year-old iPad, which is actually kind of fascinating. Now with this particular iPad, the panel itself was actually pretty decent. It was a good upgrade coming from the previous generation, which again is always good to see. And overall, I'll definitely tell you with the panel itself, it's definitely not that bad. The only thing you're missing out on this panel that most panels have nowadays is like ProMotion or a little bit less bezel, but even that's not that big of a deal and it's still a pretty good looking iPad. Now you are getting noticeable amount of bezel on this thing compared to the latest and greatest generation of devices, but it's still not even that big of a deal in my opinion either. On top of that, you're getting the front-facing camera, and you are actually getting Touch ID on this particular device as well, which again for a lot of people might be a really, really cool thing. Getting Touch ID on this type of device is actually very awesome, and that's something I love seeing and love having on this particular device. Touch ID, again, is one of my most favorite things, Touch ID or Face ID, and that is kind of the problem with older iPads than this thing, because you aren't really getting those types of security measures, just like a passcode. So from that side of things, that kind of covers it up there. On the bottom, you are getting a lightning port, which again is nice to have. I love having lightning, and this is pretty much no exception. It's still a pretty good thing for the most part. You're also getting things like, headphone jack on this particular iPad as well, which again is a very, very nice thing to have. And on the back side, completely flat back. Looks very, very nice. You have the Apple logo in the center and single camera setup in the top left corner as well. And I do think for the most part, it actually is a pretty good looking and pretty good feeling, device. It doesn't really feel that bad. And I do think for the most part, it's a very, very excellent feeling device when it comes down to it. So if I'm going through and if I'm using some sort of device, this iPad feels very premium. It does not feel cheap at all. And I do think that is a really cool advantage when you're buying some sort of device like this, because it doesn't really feel like a cheap or it doesn't feel like a cheap iPad. Now, like I said, some things that new iPads have that this thing misses. For one, like I said, no ProMotion, but also no USB Type-C. That's a pretty big thing that a lot of iPads have nowadays. This particular iPad does not have it, which can be kind of a downside or can be kind of a, con for some people out there. I don't really think there's anything else, maybe like no flat sides on this particular iPad, but from the exterior, this thing still feels and looks pretty good, and I don't really have that much to complain about here from the exterior standpoint. Now on the camera side, this is where you can kind of start to complain about some things, as you may have kind of guessed it. So just kind of keeping you in mind, this thing came out 10 years ago. So it was a very, very long time ago when this iPad actually came out, and that is kind of the problem that you're getting here. So with this iPad, you're getting a single 8 megapixel standard camera on the back, and you're getting a 1.2 megapixel standard camera on the front. So with those numbers in mind, you have to keep in mind, like, we have not seen an iPhone that had a 1.2 megapixel standard camera on the front in a very long time. I would basically equate this particular camera to something like an iPhone 6 type of camera. That's essentially what's going on with this particular lens. So it's probably even worse than an iPhone 6 if I'm being honest, but I would say it's around that type of quality. So you have to ask yourself, would you go and use an iPhone 6 camera in this day and age? Or better yet, the phone that you have in your pocket or on your desk or whatever, is that better than an iPhone 6 camera? If the answer is yes, then you will never use this iPad camera probably ever. It would make zero sense to go and do something like that. But if the answer is no, if you are still using an iPhone 6, I would recommend you to go and upgrade your camera. That's kind of the big thing. But also with devices like the iPad Air 2, it's not even that, it's not that great of a camera, especially with the viewfinder being so big, it kind of makes things look even worse. But I would tell you for the most part, it's actually not that terrible either. Like, it's a usable camera. It just wouldn't be a camera I would use. So you can still take photos and videos, and you can, take FaceTime calls if you want to. I think FaceTime calls would be the extent I would use on this particular iPad. Other than that, I wouldn't really plan on using this iPad at all, and it doesn't make any sense at all to go and use an iPad camera like this, if I'm being honest. So kind of keep that in mind. If you're getting this type of device, that's kind of the biggest thing I'd keep in mind, is that this camera really isn't that great anymore. So from that particular perspective, that kind of covers it up there. Now, on the other side of things, on the software side, this was actually one of, I would say, the bigger things going on for this particular iPad, which was very surprising. Apple would just not let this iPad end. Like, this iPad just kept going and going and going, and that was a very, very surprising thing going on for this particular device. This thing ended up going from iOS 8 all the way up until iPadOS 15.8.1, and there were even rumors that this thing was going to get iPadOS 16. So this was in and of itself a very crazy thing, and that in and of itself was very wild. So if I'm looking back and if I'm going to get some sort of device, I definitely would want a device that's getting support for a long period of time. And from iOS 8 to iOS 15.8.1, this device was still getting software updates, which was actually pretty crazy. And I do think it's still getting some security updates here and there, which again is another super crazy thing. But I will tell you, this device is no longer getting software support, and you probably do not want to go and be in a situation where you're no longer getting software on your particular device. So I say that to say, on your particular phone, it doesn't really make a lot of sense to go and buy a device anymore like this, because it just isn't getting software support. You are much better off purchasing an iPhone or an iPad or whatever device that is still supported with software. And luckily for you, there are still lots of devices that can give you software support. Unfortunately, this iPad is no longer giving you that type of experience. So once again, I just wouldn't want to recommend a device to people if that device is already going to be outdated. And that's kind of what's going on with this particular iPad. So because of that, I just wouldn't recommend anyone to purchase this iPad anymore. Now, in terms of performance, this iPad was giving you, at the time, pretty decent chipset, the Apple A8X chip inside with 2 GB of RAM. Definitely not that bad, I would say, for the most part. Like, if you're going through and getting some sort of device, that was a pretty powerful chip at that time. But then when the iPhone 6 ended up getting, unsupported with software, it was weird to me that this particular phone, or this particular iPad ended up continuing to get software support for years after, even though they kind of had the same chipset going on. So with that being said, I will still tell you, with something like the iPhone, with the iPad Air 2, definitely not a bad performing iPad or a terrible performing iPad by any means. And I still think it's not, for its age, it's not terrible, but it is not that great either. And that's kind of a thing you have to keep in mind. When you're getting a device like the iPad Air 2, you're getting a tablet that just isn't really that great anymore. So the performance isn't that great. It's not getting supported with software. And I only say that it's not that bad because of its age. If this was an iPad that came out this year, it's a terrible performing iPad. It's glitchy, it's slow, things crash all the time for me. But, other than that, I don't think it's terrible for the most part for its age. So to kind of sum it up, what I would definitely tell you is, I look at a device like the iPad Air 2, and I probably wouldn't recommend anybody to buy this thing anymore. You are much better off buying something that is still kind of supported with software. So think of iPads like the iPad Air 3, iPad Air 4, maybe like the iPad 6, 7, 8. Those types of iPads are much better than this particular iPad in almost every single way. So from that perspective, that kind of covers it up here for the most part. If you have any other thoughts or questions, let me know in the comment section below. Hit the like button, that will mean so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. More importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.